Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. This month, we are going back to, 2015, June of 2015, for episode 026. And on that episode, there was a lot of stuff going on, but the part that we're going to be covering on this Best of edition is my follow-up on bicycle touring upstate New York. As many of you know, I grew up in Western New York, not far, a stone's throw, if you will, away from the Erie Canal. And that was really kind of the genesis, my origin story, my comic book origin story, if you will, of how I got into the idea of bicycle touring. When I was a kid, as I talk about in all sorts of different places, I would look down the Erie Canal towpath and I would look in one direction. I'd know it was west because of where the sun was. And I'd be like, if I go all the way there, 50 or 60 miles, I'd be in Buffalo. And then I would turn around and look the other direction and look east. And I'd be like, if I go a lot farther, because I didn't know how far away Albany was, but I knew it was a lot farther, I could go all the way to Albany. And that was just such a mind blower for me because I rode my bike on it, and it was something that really got me to thinking about adventure by bicycle, and it always stuck with me. So I always wanted to go out and do that ride again, and I did. I did it in 2015, and it was fantastic, and I talk about all the highs and all of the fun stuff, and maybe even a couple of the not so great things that happened on that ride. This is a true best of Pedalshift. Hope you enjoy. Erie Canal tour feedback. A reminder, of course, if you wanted to hear sort of the as it happened version of all of this, check out volume 3 of Tour Journals. That is at pedalshift.net/Erie15. Of course, you can check out in the show notes here, pedalshift.net/026. I'll have a link there as well. So what do I think about all of this? Well, obviously I come in a little bit biased. I'm a bike tourist and I grew up in a good chunk of the area and went to school in a good chunk of the area that I just biked in. So I have a fondness for it. But that all being said, my bias aside, I think this is an amazing route. And I have always been pushing people to consider the C&O and the Gap as a possibility. I really think that the Erie Canalway route is one to consider as well if you're considering something in the northeast of the United States. It's a fantastic route. There's really good infrastructure there. It's really, really nice surfaces, and it's a beautiful area of the country to check out. So if you want to see New York State, I say do this by bike. One thing I would say as just layering down the expectations is that this is, yes, the Erie Canalway Trail, but it is not fully along the Erie Canal. It is in large parts right along both the current existing canal and the historic canal as well. But there are also a lot of road parts as well that aren't anywhere near. Of course, also the system includes things like the Mohawk River. So it's not all canal. It's not sort of like how the C&O Canalway is, where you're pretty much alongside a canal, between the canal and the river most of the time. This one's a little bit different. I don't think that that's necessarily a disappointing thing for anybody. I mean, you have to be like a real fan of the canals if you would be disappointed by that, but it's just something to think about, that it's not, you're not going to have this waterway over your shoulder the exact whole way. It sort of ebbs and flows as you go along. So that's one thing to consider, when you're looking at doing this tour. I think that one of the real hallmarks of this route is that there are tons of really cool towns, upstate New York towns, lots of really friendly people and lots of really good amenities along the whole way. A lot of really charming places, not just sort of the classic port towns like Fairport and Lockport and those others, but Canajoharie and some of the others. I really, really enjoyed a lot of the towns that I went through. It's really interesting because upstate New York used to be kind of like the central hub of the economy way back in the day. And so there's that feeling that these places were important, really important at one point, but maybe now not so much. And it's just kind of interesting to sort of feel that as you cycle through it. And it's a really, really interesting kind of way to get a peek at what the past was like in this part of the country. So great history is a real major part of it. And there's so much history all around. One piece that I didn't get to do that I wish I could have done, not terribly far off of the Canalway Trail, is Seneca Falls. Of course, that's just the other day we had a major anniversary, not a round number anniversary, but the anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention. And of course, that has a lot to do with women's suffrage and women's rights and all those wonderful things that came out of Seneca Falls, New York. There's a great National Historic Park there, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to do around that. That's definitely something that I think that I would want to add on to as any kind of a bike tour when I redo this. And I'm not even going to say if, I'm going to say when I redo the Erie Canal Trail. So lots of great history. You've got Buffalo, of course, on one end, Albany on the other, and all of the towns in between. There's just a ton of great history that you can explore, or not, because frankly, it's a great bike route as well. And there's a really fascinating amount of infrastructure that goes along with not just the bikey aspects of it, but just sort of how you travel through it and seeing the canal locks and how the levels of the canal and the rivers are able to be changed with just some pumping. And when you kind of can stand there where you look and see one level of the water on one side and one level, upwards of 12 to 20 feet in difference on the other, it's really kind of cool. And it's an interesting insight into, I think I said this on the Tour Journals podcast, insight into how powerful we are in terms of human engineering and the ability to hold back Mother Nature. And it's really kind of cool to be a part of just biking along by there. The biking quality is really top notch. I think that it is probably, as a system, one of the better routes that I've ever been on. And that includes the crushed limestone that makes up the bulk of the trail portions of it. It's in a high enough quality that I would say that even a skinny tired bike could handle it. I think you might want to consider having slightly wider than that, just to make sure that you can get through any of the varying surfaces. And that's really what it is. It's a varied surface. There are ways to do this route with only on the road route, but you would miss a lot of interesting sights if you weren't on some of the Canalway trails themselves. New York Bicycle Route 5, which is a major portion of all of this, because this trail is not a fully complete trail. It uses New York Bicycle Route 5, is really well maintained, at least on the parts that I've been on. And it was kind of fantastic in terms of just the overall surface to roll on. So if you did want to do just a kind of a pure road bike adventure where you wanted to stay all on asphalt, New York Bicycle Route 5 is a great one to do. And indeed, I would actually suggest take a look at the New York State bicycle routes in general. They're really well marked. There's great maps out there, and it's a really phenomenal state to bike in. I really was quite impressed by how the whole thing looked, felt, and rolled. It was really quite great. So I would say biking quality top notch. Even the worst parts were still pretty great. So that's what I would say about the biking quality all along. Access to water and food was really very good. You're going in and out of a lot of towns. The one thing that I would say in terms of the water, I was traveling through some pretty high-end heat at times. There were a couple of days in there that were very, very warm. And while I could go off of the route quite easily to refill water as needed, I would have liked a few more opportunities on that actual trail, very close or right on the trail, whether they were in parks or elsewhere, to have better access to water right there. It's a really small point. It's, probably just like a difference between a 9 and a 10 is, the access to water and easy access to water. Certain parts weren't as good as others, but it's still pretty fantastic. And I know that at least in a couple of spots, there were parks where I was able to fill up, and that was really fantastic for me. I think that overall, you can do this route without carrying a ton of food with you. This is not a rural type of ride. You can eat in any of these towns if you choose to eat. You can carry and cook and camp and take care of all of your eating on your own. That's certainly no problem. But if you wanted to sort of pare it down and carry less, this is definitely a route you could do that. And there's plenty of opportunities. Many of the camping opportunities in some of these towns are quite literally a very short ride, or even walk away from a grocery store or from restaurants, pizza places, even, gas stations, if you're into the gas station cuisine concept of bike touring, because that's certainly how a lot of us do it. camping was pretty great. I would say I'm used to free camping or very low cost camping for bike touring. And what I found, at least in the early stages, is that I ended up paying more for convenience than I'm used to. On the first real day where I was camping, when I started in Fairport and ended up the first day going east, I was going to be camping at a lock, which it would have been free, but because of an unknown bridge outage, I wasn't able to get to that lock. Luckily, there was a commercial campground right there. And, it was, I think, $25 or $26, which for, camping is pretty expensive, especially tent camping. I gladly took it because it was, had the opportunity for a shower and a few other things that I wouldn't have gotten at the lock. But, again, a little more expensive. And, one of the things that I had anticipated to see more of would have been more opportunities for wild camping. I didn't see as many great opportunities. My eye is not as trained as some others in all of this, but I did not find a lot of places where I would kind of mentally bookmark and say, oh, well, that's a great spot for wild camping. There's a lot of private land in the area. Now, apparently the Canalway land is possible. You are able to camp on that, or at least it's not illegal, which there is a distinction between being okay and not illegal. But along most of the towpath, the trail, it's very, very tight and very tightly vegetated right off of it. So not a really good opportunity to pitch a tent. So I would say from a wild camping perspective, it wasn't as good as I anticipated. In fact, I did none. I had thought that I would, but ended up not doing any. I would say that the best surprise, the best part was camping along the lock on the last night. And it's kind of a bummer that I didn't have that opportunity on the first night, and that just the timing of the mileage didn't allow me to do more of it. But I think the next time I would consider doing more lock to lock style mileage routing, because it was just a really nice experience. You wake up and have this beautiful canal right next to you, but also you've got an opportunity to see the workings of a working lock. And there's, really good amenities there. There's bathrooms and there's all sorts of stuff that you really need. And usually you're relatively close to a town, so you can go get supplies as needed. So I think that the camping is generally good, but for the most part, unless you really are more aware of the camping opportunities there. The state park, for instance, was more expensive. The private campground was more expensive than I'm used to. Perfectly great opportunities, just more expensive than what I tend to like to do. And I know for a lot of folks out there who do bike touring as more of a method of having a low cost option to go out there, or just don't like the idea of paying to sleep on the ground. I think friend of the show, Nathan Clevenger, always says that, why I can't believe I have to pay $10 to sleep on the ground or something like that. I always liked how he said that. There are opportunities out there, but it's a little fewer and far between compared to some other places that I've been to. Good encounters. I had not as many encounters with bike tourists as I expected. And I think part of that was that 2 days behind me were 600 bike tourists coming through in that big organized tour that's put together every year. So I think that maybe that sucked the oxygen out for bike touring during that time. But the encounters that I did have with some of the bike tourists were really, really good. I had some nice conversations. Not in a way that I got to know people well enough like I did last summer, where I ended up doing that nice interview and could introduce people to the podcast, but nice enough to have kind of good, friendly conversations. At some point, I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of get some more of those going on as well. Who knows? Maybe a future bike tour, I can get some more people onto the podcast. It's just a little bit weird to kind of pull out a mic and say, hey, want to be on my podcast? It's just weird. Prime time. I would say summer is probably the second best time to do this trail. It's a little bit on the muggy side. The weather in upstate New York is good. If you're used to upstate winters, it's fantastic and you'll take every second of it. But from a bike touring perspective, if you don't like going in high heat and mugginess and frankly mosquitoes, it's a fairly mosquito-fied area, if I can make up that word. And I would say that the ideal time might be a little bit later in the year, probably September. I think upstate New York Septembers are just absolute paradise. So if you've got the opportunity to do the trip in September, that would be a really great time to do it. You wait another month, you get into October, maybe it's not going to be as warm and you're going to have some chillier nights, but then you're talking foliage time. And on a year like this where it was so green and abundant, I bet you this fall will be just fantastic up there. So if you're looking for a fall tour, you really can't go wrong up along the Erie Canalway route. I want to give some big shout outs and big thanks to all Tour Journals listeners and social media followers for tagging along. As I always do, I did a special shout out episode, so I named a bunch of you by name, but I really love doing those, and it's really fun to sort of have all of you tagging along. It's like I've got you strapped to my bike along the whole way. Big special thanks to Rochelle in Albany for some great tips, and friend of the show, Ethan Georgie, for his Canal story, because frankly, without that, I might have repeated the exact same thing that he did. Speaking of, so we all heard friend of the show, Ethan Georgie, and his story on the last episode of the show. Actually, 2 episodes of the show. See, I'm not used to this whole weekly thing. 2 episodes ago, we had that. And we found out that friend of the show, Tony S., explains that, yes, indeed, he said this by Twitter, there are confusing pink arrows. If you haven't heard that episode, the trailway, especially once you're sort of getting away from just the gritty trail, the stone dust trail, there are pink arrows. There's a circle and then a line in the direction that you're supposed to go. And those are really helpful. Now in Canal, unfortunately, there are conflicting pink arrows. In fact, there are ones that'll say go this way and then they'll send you around in a circle. So that was rather confusing, and it was the only real place where I encountered that. And of course, you heard what happened to poor Ethan. He ended up having a little type 2 fun, which is, the fun you have when you get sent off on a wild goose chase, and it's awful in the moment, but kind of fun at the same time. Well, those pink arrows were partially responsible for that. Friend of the show, Tony, says that he's done the route before, and apparently those pink arrows are put out there by this large group tour, the supported tour that they do every year, the one that I was 2 days ahead of, and that they were actually, in some of them, were trying to point you a couple of years ago, I believe it was, he said, to the campground, because that was going to be the end of the day campsite for people in Canal. So what you ended up having was pink arrows to say, hey, here's how the route goes, and then pink arrows that say, hey, go to this campground. Well, unfortunately, it sends you in this very confused situation. Luckily, Google Maps does have the right route. So I would say that if you're rocking a smartphone and you're using Google Maps at all, or even want to just turn it on in Canal, I would definitely recommend you do it, because it's right there in front of you, but it is so easy to miss, because if you're used to looking at those pink arrows to give you that sort of little bit of a way, an idea of which way to go, you'll kind of blindly follow them. You'll be starting to make this right, and you really want to be going kind of bearing left, straight and left to stay on the trail. And it's very obvious when you're on it, but when you're not, it can send you off on a little bit of a wild goose chase. So Tony, thank you for solving the mystery. Friend of the show, Tony, for doing that, and friend of the show, Ethan Georgie, for sharing his unfortunate following of the pink arrow that was not the right way. Hey, one more thing here, just for the best of. Episode 26 had a whole bunch of stuff. You just heard it. It's really good. But there's been a brand new resource that I want to share with you, and this comes from the community. A friend of the show and Pedalshift Society member Paul Mulvey has an excellent resource on the Erie Canal. Go to his website, glacierbandits.com/Erie Canal, and he's got a really great setup with maps and everything for a ride all the way from Buffalo to Albany on the Erie Canalway Trail. It's a really cool resource. It's a really thoughtful route. Great mileage, great pacing, great setup. Go check that out. Again, glacierbandits.com/Erie Canal. If you forget that, I actually put this link in the show notes to the original OG episode 026. So that's pedalshift.net/026. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.